Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'm going to do a bit of a river scene. This is from Broken Hill days, where I was born and bred, Menindee, on the Darling River. So there's some beautiful lakes and river scenes out there. So I just want to capture this and give you guys an idea how to make water look nice and get a few reflections done. But there's several applications, so we're going to just keep doing bit by bit and come back as it dries and take it from there. So I've just mixed a bit of this Prussian blue and that nice burnt sienna. Get rid of all that stuff there. That's why I was a bit rough when I undercoated it, because I knew I was going to paint over this part anyway. So this is going to be a nice little line of trees. So this I'm using is a number 12, just an old hog hair brush. So oils obviously take a lot longer to dry than acrylics. So this undercoat here is only half an hour or so old, and it's quite dry enough to go over now. But the oils, this type of painting, I usually give it a day or overnight to dry off enough to be tacky enough to receive the next application. Otherwise, once I finish this part of the trees, if I want to put the highlights of the foliage on straight onto this, because it's a slippery surface as well and the paint's quite wet, we're going to get a bit of mud. Whereas if I let it dry off, when I put the highlights on, it's just going to grab in little places and it's going to be just so much easier to apply. So just doing a little line of trees here off in the background. So I'm not pushing very hard. Once again, the pressure is really important. It's just nice and soft. If you need to go harder, but just doing that nice and gentle. Okay, so that looks like it would be just a nice little cluster of trees off there in the background. Okay, here comes a good bit. Bring that down a little bit lower. So what I want to do now is try and mirror what I've got on top back down into the water. So we'll get all these basic bigger bits here. All right, and then we've got, so it doesn't have to be exact, but we want to get it pretty close. So sort of line that up there, bring that out a little bit. I'll give you a bit of an idea. Great spot up here. I used to spend a lot of time on the Darling River catching yabbies and yellow belly. Beautiful. Good feed of yabbies. I miss it so much. I haven't been out there for a little while. And the yellow belly are on. They really go off. Good fun. Beautiful fish. Okay. So there you go. It was sort of mirrored. It doesn't have to be exactly spot on. Get some tissues. Okay, so I'm going to have the water line running through the middle here. So it's got to be a little bit steady. And once again, I haven't used too much pressure here, just nice and light. I don't want to take too much off too quick. And you can see that's starting to look pretty handy as far as the reflections go. So this is why I've used that glossy background, so I can apply it and wipe it off. That's got a great look, so straight away you've got that mirrored image. That's why it didn't have to be too detailed, but it gives you the idea of the structure of the trees, and that's nice and straight. Lovely. I can just bring some of them across through the waterline. There we go. So that's the base. It's a good structure and foundation for a great little painting here. So it is a bit time consuming doing them this way, having come back with the different applications, but it's well worth the wait because you can get some great results. This will really come up good. So once again, I'm not banging that too hard, just tapping it. You don't want to load the brush too heavy, otherwise I'm going to get really big, ugly blobs. So that's what the palette's for, to prepare your brush, get it just right before you put it onto the actual painting itself. So this is obviously the foliage, they're not big ugly clouds. So this is going to be some trees, and I'm going to have these coming out of the water and put the reflections of the trunks and the trees, and that's going to give us a lot of interest. It's going to look really good. And this looks dark, but it's like a lot of paintings, certain parts you want these darks on first. So as soon as I come and put some mid-tone and highlight really nice light tones of green over this foliage, it's going to give it a lot of depth. So we're going to have those darks and then the mid-tones and the lights, and it's going to make them rounded and give them more form. So okay, so there's not really a lot more I can do on this until all this dries off. I really need that to dry off. And then the next application, I want to put the highlights and all the foliage on. And then I'll have to wait again because I can't really put all the branches and things over it until that's dry. So it's one of these things that it's a type of style that's going to take maybe 4 different applications, and they're all going to require overnight rest just to get tacky enough to go ahead with the next section. So so obviously these trees here, I'm going to have the branches starting in the water, coming out of the water. A little one back there a lot closer, and these ones, the bigger foreground ones, are going to start here and come up and put these beautiful trees, and then we'll have all the reflections coming off them. It's going to come up really nice. So we'll come back to this one soon. Okay, just a quick recap. So what we've done here so far, quick undercoat, which was a sealer. This is on hardboard, so I put a sealer on there, and then I've used the glossy finish, like it's a enamel, acrylic enamel mixed with acrylic paint. So that's nice and smooth. So this is all dry now. So in the last section we've put all this in over the top and wiped back all the reflection. So the next stage is to whack a bit of colour on. And the reason with oils, you've got to let it dry in between. It takes a lot longer. It's a period of days of different applications. So that's nice and dry. So that's going to accept this next coat without getting all muddy. So we've let that dry off overnight, and I've got a little bit of Prussian blue, Indian yellow and titanium white. So just mixing them up to get a nice greeny foliage colour. And once again, this is all about pressure too, because if I go and whack this on really hard, it's going to be a big blob, and we don't want that. So I'm just loading the side of my brush up, and just really gently, just going to take some of this off. So we've got a really good tooth here. It's dry, the undercoat, the dark stuff, so it's just grabbing a hold of this green as I drag it across, really, really gentle. So the pressure's really, really light. So because we're not on site, I'm going to assume all the light source is coming from the right, going back towards the left. So I'm going to load up the right hand side of these trees, or the foliage on the right hand side, with it just catching the light. Very, very light pressure. And if I made a blue now and made a mistake and done a big blob and it didn't work, I could get a bit of tissue and just wipe it off, because that undercolour's totally dry now. So depending on what brand of oils, maybe you need 2 days in between to let it dry off. So, and that's just giving it a nice bit of depth. That looks good. So later on we'll come along and put all those sticks and things in there. We can vary this greeny colour by a little bit more blue, less white, a bit more yellow, and darken these down a little bit more. So because of that light pressure, it's just grabbing enough paint off the brush. It's a nice sunny little lake scene. And here on Tambourine Mountain at the moment, it's about 27 degrees. It's a gorgeous day, sun shining outside, just beautiful. So these background trees, there's a lot more white in that green, so it's nice and bright off in the distance. And as I'm coming forward, with these trees are getting closer, just a little bit more blue in there to darken it up, because it's actually quite darker than this one. So you just play with it on the palette and mix it up as you go. So there we go, from those horrible dark fluffy bits, it's all looking good. Got a bit of depth with those nice deep colours in the background there. So that's it, that's our next stage. So before I put the tree trunks and all the little sticks in, I'm going to have to let this dry again, otherwise it just gets really muddy and I start dragging that green through as I go. You can do it, but it's just a lot better if you can let them dry off in between. So here's one I prepared earlier. Sound like a chef. So this is nice and dry. So I've done this so we can actually get through the whole process without dragging it on for several days. So our next trick here, so all this is beautiful and dry. So here we have a bit of Prussian blue and some burnt sienna, and that's what I always use for my darks because black's just too black, and I don't like to use black in landscapes at all. So I'm mixing that down, breaking it down with terps, mineral terps. So we want it nice and fluid, not too runny, but nice and fluid so we can thin it right down with that terps. And here we go. So start putting these trunks in here. So trees are funny things, they've got little bits running everywhere. So if you study the trees, you'll see there's branches coming and going and off in all sorts of directions. So I'll just put all these thicker ones in first and we'll come and make them all pretty in a minute. So this is from Menindee, not far from where I grew up in Broken Hill. Darling River runs through this area. There's a lot of beautiful lakes out there. And this is based off Lake Pamamaroo, where I used to go and catch a lot of yabbies and yellowbelly and stuff like that. Beautiful spot. Beautiful bird life. And all these trees, when the lake floods through, they're left stranded in the water, so we get some nice reflections coming off these shortly. Okay, I'll put one more in here. Okay, so I need to make them nice and neat. So I'm going to hold my marl stick, which gets in the way a bit, sorry about that, but it's a necessity for me. Just so I can get some nice, so I just lean it on there, it just helps to steady your hand. So these are going to be really flat on the bottom because they're going to be sticking out of the water. This is a nice sable brush, nice and fine. You get a nice little tip on the end. When you load your brush up, I always give it a little twirl so it makes it nice and pointy on the end, not too flat. Little sticks going out everywhere. This one is number 6, so it's not real big. So we're going to come back with a 0 shortly to put all the really fine twigs in. So with oils, we always use mineral terps to thin paint. Keep them nice and flat for the water line there. Make sure these are a nice shape. If you happen to be a brain surgeon or something, you probably don't need this stick if you've got a really steady hand, but this just helps take the wobbles out for me, which is handy. Okay, so they're all sitting pretty. Lots of little branches going all over the place. So now, this is a 0, so you can see it's really quite fine. So we want this one nice and runny. Plenty of terps. Build up a little reservoir of paint here. Okay, that's looking good. So now I'm going to do the old upside down trick. It just works for me. Quite a lot of artists do this, different stages of their paintings. You can put them sideways, upside down, as long as you know where you're going. So I'm going to run all these beautiful little fine twigs, and this really gives the shape to the tree. And this little brush, you can get a lot of other fine brushes, but because of the length of the bristle, they're quite long, so it's a bit of a reservoir, so it holds quite a bit of paint. So I get these nice long continuous lines. If we had a really short bristle, it wouldn't hold as much, so you'd have to stop and keep going back over it. So it's good to have a nice reservoir, so you can just keep going with these beautiful little lines. Keep that nice and thin. And as I said, always twirl that brush and drag it. So also the angle of the brush, I'm not going down like this, I'm actually dragging it down. That's going to keep that fine point. So you've got to keep your hand below the tip of the brush. Just drag it out. And these little twigs run right into the middle of the foliage. So that nice acrylic base, actually it dries really quick, acrylic, which is fantastic to get really quick results. And then the oil over the top of that enamel finish, it just really slides, it's shiny, and just for this particular style, we don't want that on everything we paint, but the enamel really helps it just glide through. Some nice fine lines. And these little sticks, if you have a good close look at a tree, there's little sticks go all over the place. All sorts of directions. Okay, so that's basically where we are. So that's starting to look like a really beautiful little tree there. So we go along and do that to all of them. But then, let's load this up a bit more. On the background trees, this is like scrub really in the background, so got lots of little twigs running through these. I've just had a bird fly into the studio. Hello mate, flying around. Yeah, hello. Don't stand on one of my paintings, whatever you do. Oh, this mountain's full of birds. They quite often come into the studio. With the possums and the snakes, everything else that lives up here. So this starts to give you a really nice little feel. once again, sticks are running everywhere. If you have a good look at the scrub, quite often you'll be painting from a photograph and you won't have to imagine it like I'm doing now, but I've painted this area so many times, I just love it. So this is character. So this is already starting to look really detailed, and in fact it's not really. You saw how I put the darks down first, and then just that quick nice little highlight of the foliage, and then these dark branches. We're going to come along and highlight them with some beautiful highlights, and that's going to look really detailed. It's going to give it form. So it's nice to customize your easel too. This is a nice big easel. I can slide that up and down and put it wherever I need to, rather than just have it set in one spot, locked in. And people quite often, they get worried about water, how to make water look nice. This is a really good, easy way to paint water. Just the undercoat first, with that nice bit richer and darker at the bottom, and thinning out as you get back, like the sky, lighter at the bottom and getting deeper as we go up. Okay, so this is where we are now. So I'm going to go back onto the last section now, as I said. So usually I'd put all these little twigs in and finish everything off pretty and let this set for a day or more to make sure it's all totally dry, which brings us to the next bit. So I'm going to pop that down for now, so you've got an idea of what we've done so far. So I'll pop this one down here. Okay, so this is the final part. So this is all nice and dry. I don't know, different oils take different amount of time. This has had a day or two, so that's totally dry. So that's the way we want it. So all the little sticks in the background, everything's done. And this is going to be the fun part. I like it, this part, because it really starts to come together. So our light source, as I mentioned, with the foliage and everything, from the right hand side coming through. So it's going to cast a shadow to the left. We're going to have reflection, but you always have shadows. So here we do another flippo, and flip him over on the side. That's nice and thinned down. Once again, it's just burnt sienna, Prussian blue, thinned down with the terps. I'll try and do this without making a big mistake. Okay, so this is our shadows coming off on the side of the tree being cast here. It all looks a bit scary, but you watch, it'll all come together. It's really good. So where there's light, there's always shadows. So, and when we highlight these trees, obviously going to give it a lot more form and shape here. Okay, so this is the reason I've used that glossy undercoat. Just look at this. We can wipe that back so it's really fadey there, darker towards the actual trunk. So, and because the underpaint's totally dry, we've got nice gentle shadows. a little bit darker towards the trunk side, and it just fades out. So we've just wiped off just like that. Okay, now the actual reflections. So we've got to do a mirror image of the actual trunk itself. And remember, that's why we've left the bottom of these trunks nice and flat on the waterline. You're probably thinking, oh, that's dark and horrible and too much, but we're going to wipe that back with the tissue again, and it'll all make sense. All right. This just ties the whole painting together. So obviously I'm going to pull it up here. I don't want it to go all too far because we're going to fade this off with that tissue. So it can get a bit scary. You think, I've done the wrong angle or whatever. It doesn't matter. Just wipe it off with the tissue, start again. So you don't have to be worried about making big mistakes too badly. And quite often the water in these areas is real muddy, dirty water. But I've got these blues because certain times of the day, it's really, the skies, whatever's in the sky is reflected in the water. So this we've got these beautiful blue and it just shines, it's gorgeous. Sometimes the sunsets in late afternoon, just full of colour, and once again that's mirrored in the water, so it'll be all reds and yellows. So whatever's in the sky is reflected into the water. So here we go. I'm going to take a lot of that paint off so we don't smudge it too much. Make sure you turn it over. We don't want to put a dirty piece back onto the painting. Keep flipping this tissue over. So I'm taking most of that paint off. Presto, starting to look good. Okay, get rid of that and get a nice clean one. And once again, the pressure really light on that top part. Quite hard down here because I want to fade it, and then really light pressure so it gets darker as we get up towards there. Look at that, we've got reflections, it looks great. So that's the beauty of having that dry finish before we start. So if you make a mistake like that, no problem. Off it comes. So there's our reflections. We've got the shadow coming through, nice reflections. So this is all starting to give it a bit of depth and form. We're going to get into the bit of highlighting now. I'll get another brush. That's another 0. It looks like it's done some work, this puppy. Look at that. Anyway, we'll get that ready. It's good to have a little cleaner, the brush cleaner, it's really important. If you don't have anything fancy like this, you can just have a jam tin with a rock in the bottom of it, so you can just rub your brush on the rock and give it a good old scribble. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to put two different strengths of highlight on here. So we've got the titanium white and that beautiful burnt sienna. So the first part I'm going to do is going to be quite dark, which will be on the shaded side of the tree first. So that brown's quite strong now. So as the light source is from the right, the shaded side is going to be the left side here. So I'm going to put this darker brown on the left side. And this will just give this beautiful form and shape to the tree trunks. Like the bark and the light just catching parts of the bark. And keep that terps here. And keep thinning it down to give us a nice run. So these go all the way down to the waterline. I'm only going to do this darker one on the big trees, the big trunks. We're not going to worry about the background scrubby ones. So it's not just one line, there's lots of little bits of bark on a tree. Light catches on different parts of it, so not sure if you can hear those big cockies going off outside, the huge big sulphur crest cockatoos. Been big flocks of them flying around after the rains on the weekend. Big black ones, the black cockatoos, they're huge, they're gorgeous. Here we go. So this is going to start, it helps the tree to look gnarly and barky with all these little bits of line coming through here. So that's the shaded side of the tree. Pull that down a bit more. Okay, I'll wipe a bit of that off. Get rid of that darker one. Let's wipe that off. As I've said before, these palettes are fantastic. They're paper, and you can just tear them off when you're finished. And they're nice and smooth and slippery, so you can mix really well. So this is a lot lighter than that first application, so get a bit of that going. Okay, so this is our real highlight. So the light catches on that one side of the tree. And because there's bark and rough bits, little bits of light catching on different parts of the bark. So straight away, just by putting that little bit of highlight there, And then on the other side, and this one's running straight through, it gives you that, you know, like it looks like it's going behind that other branch. So you can really play with this with the lighter highlights. And look at the form from that dirty, dark stump that we had there before. It's now transformed into a nice shape, beautiful shaped tree. There you go, the gnarly little bits of bark missing, and the way they grow naturally, it's good finish. So obviously that's why we've done the reflections and everything first, otherwise we would have made a mess trying to wipe it back with that wet highlight colour on. Right here on the brush. And the pressure here is really, really light pressure. I'm not pushing down very hard at all, otherwise you get that big mud monster popping its head out again. You just make a big mess, so it's just really gentle. You can see why I use this mail stick, which is in fact just a old golf club, but just to give you that steady finish. So the waters in this lake are filled by the Darling River, which is a massive river which starts up here in Queensland, runs right through down to Victoria, through New South Wales. And the bird life up here, or down there I should say, at Menindee, is really amazing. So we're going to stick some birds and things in here in a moment. So that's really starting to give it that depth. We've got the reflections, taking it back. Once we highlight these back here, we're going to have a lot more depth in it. I've got a bird on the roof now. Mate, I can hear that. We get bush turkeys here. They jump on the roof and scare the living daylights out of me sometimes. No good when you're doing really fine work. Okay. So we're almost done here. Look at the shape in that, that's starting to look really good. So that's virtually it, but I'd like to just put a little bit lighter again, just some real small little highlights. So we're going to lighten that right down now. Move that again. So you can see this is really, really bright. So we just want to have that where it's just catching, sun's just catching little parts that are sticking out along the edge that's facing the sun. Beautiful. So we just want to pick up where the sun might be just catching certain bits there. A little bit more there. So they've taken a lot of form now from just that black stick that was sticking out before. They've actually got shape, bit of feel, bit of movement going on here. So it's always really important to know where your light source is coming from, so you can have your highlights and your shadows. That's what really pulls the painting together. There we go. Just a tiny bit more there. Okay, so for these background ones, I'll make it a little bit darker, but we want them quite light still, but not quite as light as that real highlight. And this will start to pull this background out. So we've got all those dark twigs and things back there. And just by putting these extra ones, it just adds so much more depth. See, I've made a blue there, I can just wipe it out. That's the beauty of letting it dry first. So these little fellas come in from all sorts of angles. So already it's just starting to come to life. It's just so simple. Just a couple of little touches make such a big difference. And I keep talking about it, but really need to stress the pressure of the brush on the canvas. I'm only just touching this. If I put too much pressure, we're going to get a really thick, ugly line, and it's not going to be a good look. So it's just touching. And the more you do it, the better you get. Lots of practice. There we go, look at that. Really starting to get some beautiful fill there. Right, now I'm going to get that tiny little 0 brush now. I'll pull up a bit of this white. Get this nice and thin. All right, get a bit of life in here. Where am I going to put these? And once again, like I said, it's dry, so if you make a blue, you make a mess, wipe it off, start again. I don't even know what these birds are. I think they're an egret, I just call them waterbirds. They're just beautiful. So he's standing out in the water here because it's shallow. Shallow waters. I'll put a bit of a reflection in there. Just get rid of that. Just a little hint of reflection. A couple of his mates over here. So you obviously could put any type of wildlife in here, magpie, geese, or these egret type things, or whatever is in your area. So we just want a little hint of something going on there for the reflection, so it just grabs your eye. Better give him a beak or he'll go hungry. Okay, that's good. There you go. I'll get rid of that white. So once again, these little fellas need a little bit of reflection, shadow as well. Just a little hint. Give them some eyes so they can see what they're doing. There you go. All right, so this is the life that just brings everything back together. A couple of little birdies. I think I'm going to not too much detail, doesn't really need it. These remind me of the little sparrows. They're always flitting around on the top of the water, darting around backwards and forwards, so these little fellas can have some reflection. So that looks like they're just on top of the water surface. Just wipe that back a bit. Presto, look at that. Doesn't that look good? There we go, just like that. And you know, you can put a little bit more colour, a little bit of yellow or something into the birdies, or add all sorts of bits and pieces into them. A little bit more detail. And there we go. That looks good. I'm happy with this. So it's just so simple. These look really quite detailed through that background there, and you can see all we've done is just start with the darks, put the highlights on, The dark sticks, once again, highlight them. It all just starts to come to life, and there's not that much involved, yet it looks incredibly detailed. So there you go. That's how we do the water. Hope you enjoyed it.